This is end of the test run. I'm now hand over to Natalia.
Yeah, Natalia, can you ask Patricia to send the message, please?
Okay, we will. But now everybody, can you leave except Sumiter, and I will start the meeting. Good afternoon, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Natalia Wehmer. I'm the MC for this forum, and I want to warmly welcome you to session 4 this afternoon. First, some brief housekeeping announcements. Please note that this forum is bilingual in English and Russian. You can select the language you want to listen to by clicking on the respective interpretation channel. On behalf of our interpreters, I want to inform you that our interpreters will alternate every 20 minutes. Speakers and participants are requested to be mindful of the additional difficulties experienced by interpreters when working in remote mode and of the increased likelihood of disruptions to the audio feed to the interpreters. Only the speech or intervention in the original language constitutes an authentic record of the proceedings. Interpreters servicing remote meetings cannot be held liable for interruption of service, pixelation, freezing or loss of visual input, partial or complete loss of audio, audible artifacts, unauthorized access to personal or confidential data, leaking of information due to inadequate soundproofing, and/or data loss. Participants joining us on YouTube live stream can, throughout the session, post questions on the YouTube chat. Our colleagues will select and forward some of your questions to the moderator. Those questions we have no time to answer, we will answer in a summary format in writing later and post this onto our ESCAP forum webpage. With these housekeeping announcements out of the way, I would like to now introduce Mr. Sumita Broka, Senior Policy Officer of FAO, to take over as the moderator of the session. Mr. Broka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natalia. Very good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. And it is my honor to moderate session 4 of the North and Central Asia Multi-Stakeholder Forum on implementation of the SDGs, recovering after the COVID-19 crisis. So this session is, the theme of this session is sustainable food systems and healthy nutrition patterns. So we will start with a keynote address by Mr. Jamie Morrison from FAO. He's my colleague in FAO headquarters, Rome. I, incidentally, am the Senior Policy Officer for Central Asia and Turkey, working in the FAO Office for Central Asia in Ankara, Turkey. So I am currently there. So as I said, the keynote address will be delivered by Mr. Jamie Morrison. He's the Director of the Food Systems and Food Safety Division at FAO headquarters in Rome. And we will also be joined by 6 panelists. First, there's Mr. Kanat Tilekayev. And do forgive me if I don't pronounce your names properly. I'll do my best. Mr. Tilekayev is Senior Research Fellow at the University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan. Another panelist is Ms. Mariko Kawabata, who's the Deputy Country Director of the World Food Programme in Tajikistan. We are also joined by Mr. Sergei Zoria, who works for the World Bank as lead agriculture economist for the Europe and Central Asia region. We also have with us Mr. Alisher Shukurov, who is advisor to the Minister of Agriculture of Uzbekistan on economics, innovative development, and investments. We are joined also by Ms. Adiba Ahmedjanova, who is the founder of the Association of Agrarian Women working in the agrarian sphere. Welcome. And we hope that Ms. Manzoora Sultanova, who is the director of the NGO Saudat, will be able to join us, but apparently she's having some connection problems. So with this introduction, I will move straight to Mr. Morrison. I'll request him to start the keynote presentation. Over to you, Jamie.
Thank you, Simita, and good afternoon to everybody. Before providing this keynote address, I'd just like to emphasize the importance for the North and Central Asia region of having this multi-sector dialogue on the current progress and key challenges in the acceleration of the SDGs, particularly SDG 2 on zero hunger. This is sorely needed in the face of the current pandemic, COVID-19. So while I wait for the presentation to come on, I would like to acknowledge the UNESCAP's commitment, not only in the organization of this event, but also in its ongoing work in close collaboration with other entities and governmental organizations in the region in the achievement of the SDGs. But today we need to focus on how to change the way in which we transform our food systems in a way that contributes positively to the achievement of all of the SDGs. This reflection needs to include many aspects related to production, transformation, distribution, consumption, and disposal of food. And this holistic approach is reflected in the title of my presentation. Next, please. In the presentation, I'll briefly touch on three main points. Firstly, a conceptual overview. What do we mean by sustainable food systems? And how can sustainable food systems contribute to the achievement of the SDGs? I'll then look at the current state of food systems in the NCA region, in the NCA countries. What are some of the underlying challenges and current disruptions to the systems, including some of those caused by COVID-19? And then finally, move to considering how these disrupted food systems can also create opportunities for driving longer-term transformation. And I'll highlight some of the elements for enhancing sustainable food systems and strengthening health and nutrition outcomes in the region. Next, please. In most countries, we've seen in the past that governments and food system stakeholders have taken a sectoral approach, and the main attention when discussing food has tended to be on primary production. Often consumers were not part of the picture. Food security policies and interventions tended to focus on rural areas and producers. We ignored urban consumers. Environmental dimensions were insufficiently addressed. What the sustainable food system approach allows us to do is to address some of these shortcomings by offering a more holistic framework, one which comprises all of the functions of the actors and their interrelated value chain activities, which are involved from production through processing, distribution, consumption, and disposal of food products. It also allows us to assess food system activities against priority outcomes for different communities, regions, countries. These include economic development outcomes such as inclusive incomes, jobs and livelihoods, social equity, ensuring safe, secure and safe food and nutrition is available to all, and also environmental protection. How do we ensure environmentally sustainable practices and resilience of agriculture to climate change in the further development of our food systems? The approach also focuses in on the many interconnections and trade-offs that we see between these different outcomes. And I'll come back to some of these trade-offs in a subsequent slide. But essentially what we're trying to do through this approach is to try to find sustainable solutions which are appropriate to the context in which we find ourselves, given the geographical differences in institutional capacities, differences in priorities, and how we can push forward a transformation of food systems in order to deliver both sufficient supply but also improved access to healthier foods. Next slide, please. So this slide gives an example of what we mean by trade-offs. And there are many trade-offs. This is just one particularly dramatic one. I mean, before getting into the example, I should say that many of the trade-offs that we face need to be addressed through a political process. But we need to ensure that this is multi-stakeholder based and supported by sufficient and robust scientific evidence. So the example I'm giving here looks at the amount of grain requirements in terms of feed conversion rate to produce different types of meat product. So for example, it takes 25 kilograms of feed grain to produce a kilogram of beef, whereas for chicken and eggs, we only require about 4 kilograms of grain per kilogram of edible weight of those products. But in the right-hand side of the figure, we can also see that producing 1 kilogram of meat requires approximately 15,000 litres of water, whereas to produce a kilogram of wheat requires about 1,500. So only 10% of the requirement of a kilogram of meat. So taking this sort of evidence, we could interpret that as meaning that a move away from red to white meat could be good for the environment. We see less use of a natural resource, water in this case. Potentially we have lower greenhouse gas emissions, and we could also have health impacts as well. So white meat it causes less of a contribution to cardiovascular diseases, for example. So that's on the sort of positive side of a push, for example, from red to white meat. But on the other hand, we know that ruminants are often reared in areas which have limited potential for other productive areas. And so if we had a reduction in the demand for red meat, which may be pushed through public policies or consumer education, for example, that could result in undermining the livelihoods of often poor livestock farmers and herders. So clearly we have a trade-off here, and you know, it would be a political process that needs to be thought through and may require compensatory measures, policies to facilitate a transition to a more sustainable food system, which ensures livelihoods are maintained, but also results in an improved health and nutritional outcome. Next, please. So with that in mind, just turning to the second part of the presentations, how can a move towards more sustainable food systems contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals? Now, what we've been arguing at FAO for a number of years is that a transformation in food systems contributes not only to SDG 2, zero hunger and improved malnutrition, but contributes directly to at least 14 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, whether they be in terms of health outcomes, environmental outcomes, economic development outcomes. And so we need to be taking account of all of these outcomes when we look at how we're promoting a transformation of food systems. Now, for this reason, the United Nations Secretary General is convening a food systems summit towards the end of 2021, which will be a key component of the decade of action towards the achievements of the SDGs by 2030. The summit, which we're still in the process of setting up, it will be formally launched within the next couple of weeks. The process towards the summit will work around 5 key objectives. Firstly, ensuring access to safe and nutritious food for all. Secondly, shifting consumption patterns to ensure that they're more sustainable. Thirdly, boosting nature-positive production at sufficient scales. Fourthly, advancing equitable livelihoods and value distribution. And fifthly, and this is becoming increasingly important with COVID, building resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stresses. And you'll see through the titles of these 5 objectives that they match quite closely some of the points that I made in the initial slides about the importance of considering these different dimensions, and particularly the trade-offs that we will see between them. Next slide, please. So, of course, I think it goes without saying that whatever work we're doing now in relation to pushing forward the transformation of food systems, we have to accept the reality of COVID and the fact that many communities, many governments, many of those involved in business have a short-term focus on coping with and addressing the disruptions of the COVID-19 pandemic. This has affected all dimensions of supply and distribution of food in all regions of the world, and it's having a particularly significant effect on the more vulnerable groups, whether they be producers, whether they be workers involved along the food system, or whether they be consumers in terms of accessing affordable and healthy food. At the same time, the way that we're looking at this is that this disruption also creates an opportunity to really trigger a transformation towards more sustainable, more resilient food systems. And in the words of the FAO Director General, if we can make food systems more sustainable, resilient and inclusive, and healthy diets accessible and affordable for everybody, this will be paramount in building back better from COVID-19. Next slide, please. So why is all of this relevant to the region? I think what we're seeing is a rapidly changing dietary patterns within the region over the last decades, which have resulted in significant issues related to both obesity and other forms of malnutrition. The FAO's regional state of food, SOFI, State of Food Insecurity in 2019 notes a number of points about this sub-region. On the one hand, there is a very low prevalence of hunger at the chronic or severe level. But if we look at undernourishment, we see that between 16 and 20% of the total population within this sub-region have a moderate or severe level of undernourishment. On the other hand, we're also seeing that overweight and obesity are on the rise. And this is alarmingly high in some countries in the region and way above the world average of about 13% of the population. We see 30 to 40% obesity amongst adults in some countries in the region now. And whilst these are often taken as sort of separate issues, undernutrition versus overweight and obesity, they're actually part of a complex where we see issues of undernutrition, overweight, obesity, and inadequate access to micronutrients coming together in the same individual, perhaps at different stages of their life cycle, but it is a concern for all of us, wherever we sit in whichever country. In terms of some of the underlying causes, what we've observed also is that there is a significant inequality and underinvestment in agriculture. And this, amongst other drivers, is driving these trends that we're seeing within the region. Next slide, please. These inequities and levels of underinvestment in the region have led to a slowdown in production growth in several countries, especially in Central Asia. Output growth has also become much more volatile in recent years. And this is not only related to shocks related to climate, but also to trade shocks. we saw in 2008, 2009 with the price spikes, this was often related to closures of borders and restrictions on trade between countries. We're also seeing shocks in terms of in relation to migration and remittances, and particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing a significant drop in remittances coming from countries into the region as a result of higher levels of unemployment in countries where migrants may have been making a living. And a final result of this underinvestment and inequitable investment across the system is an increased degradation of natural resource base, with an overuse of chemical inputs and of natural resources such as water. Next slide, please. So let me conclude with a couple of slides looking at the priorities for the regions and the types of actions that may be required. In terms of the key priorities, we've identified a significant need to improve institutional and policy environment to reduce inequalities and to promote inclusive growth. This will also help to foster better and improved use and management of natural resources. We also need to see an increasing adoption of technical and institutional innovations along the supply chain, not just in terms of how food is produced, but also in terms of how it is marketed. We're seeing a move towards digital e-commerce in some countries, which significantly reduces the costs of commerce. But we also need to be clear that many of the inhabitants globally, and particularly in this region, are increasingly living in urban areas. And this requires us to have much more robust distribution systems with related cold chain facilities to ensure that fresh, nutritious food can be made available to these people living in urban areas. Other key areas that we need to be looking at are attracting investment, particularly in green growth and carbon neutrality, and harnessing, as I've said, the sort of digital innovations and technologies along the supply chain. Next slide, please. But in achieving these types of priorities, we know that this is only possible within the region if we take actions around the following three points. Firstly, improve governance of food systems. We need system thinkings. We need to move away from the siloed sectoral approach that we've often seen in the past to taking a multi-sector, multi-minister, multi-stakeholder approach to determining what the right pathway is for a particular food system, and then ensuring that policy is coherent in order to ensure that transformation to happen. A second point is that we need much more robust evidence and data to underpin analysis to make sure that we are on the right track. And again, this evidence and data is one of the key components of the process towards the Food System Summit, which will take place next year. We want to avoid a situation where whichever community or business or government is able to shout loudest gets their way. We need this to be based much more on evidence to understand the trade-offs and to track a clear way forward. And related to that, we need a process of inclusive multi-stakeholder policy dialogue to manage these trade-offs. Next slide, please. So let me close by just quickly drawing your attention to three initiatives that FAO is currently supporting in relation to food system transformation within this region. Firstly, there's the cross-UN issues-based coalition on sustainable food systems in East and Central Asia. A second initiative which we're driving from FAO is the COVID response and recovery program, where we have a specific priority on triggering food system transformation, where we're trying to ensure that actions taken in response to the disruption will have a positive effect in the future and build upon those. And the third, which I've already mentioned, is the UN Food System Summit, and I'd be happy to expand on any of these initiatives during the discussion. So thank you, and back to you, Sumita.
Thank you very much, Jamie, for a very thoughtful and interesting presentation, which I hope will be found helpful by particularly our member countries, but also by other stakeholders, because as you mentioned, it's extremely important to have a multi-stakeholder dialogue here that involves all stakeholders. So thank you very much. Now we'll move to the second part of the session, in which I'll ask each panel member to make a brief intervention of about 5 minutes. Please try to keep it fairly brief. Of course, it's up to you. We'd like to hear your thoughts in response to what Jamie said, and possibly even going beyond. So let me go in the same order that I introduced the panelists. I would like to start by asking Mr. Kanat Tilakayev to please make a brief intervention. As I mentioned, he's Senior Research Fellow with the University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan, and with the University of Central Asia's Institute of Public Policy and Administration. So he's engaged in research and capacity building projects aimed at enhancing social cohesion through community-driven development and gender and employment in Central Asia. So, Mr. Tilakayev, on to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sumita, for the presenting me. And what I want to say on the issues which was raised in the Jamie's presentation, yes, in general, we actually agree. And I can, from my own experience and from the research which we involved, say several important, probably, messages from our sides, as from the person who involved in the analysis of the food security and nutrition issues, not only in Kyrgyzstan, but also in the whole Central Asia. What we can also say based on the evidence which we collect, which FAO also collect, and the many other institutions working in the area. First of all, we need to state that during last 20 years in all Central Asian countries happened improvement of the food security situation. And nutrition issues improved over time, but we need to notice two things. First of all, the most of the progress on improvement was done in the first decade of this century. So between 2000 and 2010, there was serious improvement in Kyrgyzstan and in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and in Kazakhstan, also in Turkmenistan. All these countries improve a series of indicators, better nutrition issues, better protein, increased amount of the meat consumption, which from other sides could be also negative. But we also should say that there is a seriously exists a gap between countries based on the national diet. For example, consumption in, for example, consumption of red meat in Kazakhstan was highest in the region, and it's actually doubled during the last 20 years. And improvement also happened in Kyrgyzstan, and level of meat, red meat consumption over time in those two countries in general higher. Comparing with the other countries like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, it's actually there exists a serious gap for those issues. The same could be said about the, for example, health nutrition related indicators. For example, increasing of an improvement of the food for the people led to increase of the specific problems with the health. Obesity in all countries increased over time, and actually the highest level we can observe in Kazakhstan. In Kyrgyzstan, it's also unfortunately, we face with the same problem. And again, those countries which we can notice, for example, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, shows much lower level of obesity comparing with Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. So there exists a gap between our countries. What was very interesting, we are now currently involved in the project with FAO about the linkage with nutrition and health indicators. And we found that in Kyrgyzstan, in different regions exists a serious gap, and actually it's very interesting. For example, Kyrgyzstan, we may say that it's divided on two parts, south and north. And in North Kyrgyzstan, diet very close to what we can observe in Kazakhstan. In northern Kyrgyzstan, consumption of meat much higher, and consumption of fruits and vegetables lower, comparing with the South Kyrgyzstan, where diet closer to what people eat in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. And we found that there exists actually a gap between diseases, for example, diabetes, obesity, and such kind of problems higher on the northern part of the country. Probably we can say that there is some evidence where we may argue that there are direct linkage between the food people eat and the health outcome which we can result. And this is a very interesting finding that we can say could be studied, and we can make a further analysis on that. And in this year also we say that exists a very interesting and very critical approach to what people starting to eat in a COVID pandemic situation, because many countries close the borders and supplies of very important food items was under the crisis. For example, we have problem with the supply of wheat or flour from Kazakhstan. Certain moment our borders was closed, and we actually have a maybe not a crisis, but actually it was a panic on the food market, where we have on a certain period of the years, it was April, it was May, where people in very high rush purchasing all products, but basically they were in rural Kyrgyzstan. It was a problem to find wheat, and it takes a lot of efforts from the governments to overpass this situation. I think this is also very important to say that if we have a common Eurasian Economic Union without any borders, how we can assure food security in such situation. This is a very critical thing which we may think for our country, for our government, but also for relations between countries. Stopping the trade may be not the best idea. And we also find that a lot of import of goods from other countries was also complicated. And it brings a situation where we have observed increasing food prices. And it's becoming a very similar process in all neighbor countries. So stopping the trade, also making our food system more unstable. And I think this is also we may took into account. We will, I think that the real results of what's going on in this year, we can receive only maybe mid next year. So we need some time to pass this crisis, then to collect all data, analyze, and understand how its effect on the people's food systems, people nutrition, and how its effect on the health indicators. Here I want to stop and give the floor to other participants to say their opinions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kanant. I mean, for this very nice overview. So I picked up some interesting points. I mean, first of all, the point you made about the rapid improvement in the nutrition situation, which basically ended around 2010. And it would be interesting. I mean, this is also being picked up by FAO, by the way. We are noticing the stagnation ourselves. And this is extremely important. And your other point about obesity and red meat consumption and how that's tied to health indicators, especially diabetes, obesity, et cetera. And the third point that I picked up was, yes, trade restrictions. I'm afraid this is something that just about every country in the world resorts to, whenever there's a problem.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I agree.
it's still, but nevertheless, we need to keep pointing this out, that this is not necessarily the best response in the long run. Thank you so much. I will now turn to Ms. Mariko Kawabata, Deputy Country Director of WFP in Tajikistan. Ms. Kawabata has more than 15 years experience in food security and nutrition analysis and food assistance programming. I am also very interested to see that prior to her work with WFP in Tajikistan, she led the Vulnerability Analysis and Mapping, VAM, unit at the WFP Regional Bureau for the Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe. So over to you, Mariko, for your views and reflections. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Smita, for the introduction, and also to Jimmy, a very inspiring keynote speech. I mean, I cannot disagree with you more on the points that you mentioned, all the systems approach and transformation and the importance of data and evidence. I'd like to share with you through describing the impacts of COVID-19 on food systems in the context of Tajikistan. What we observe is COVID-19 has revealed the vulnerability exists across the food systems. Taking example, Tajikistan is heavily reliant on food imports. For example, wheat being the staple food commodity, half of the wheat consumed in the country is imported. Also, remittances from migrant workers abroad are among the major source of income, accounting for up to 1/3 of the GDP. So on the food security and nutrition situation of the population, there has been significant gains over the past decades. However, the country remains to have the highest malnutrition rate among the CIS countries. Inequality persists, and especially in the remote and rural areas, exhibiting higher rates of malnutrition and poverty. An example of a child stunting rate, when we look at the national average, is at 17%. But in one remote region, which is Gubao, the mountainous region, the rate is almost double. So that shows the inequality across the country. The COVID-19 affected all dimensions of food security, hitting the hardest among the most vulnerable. And Tajikistan is not an exception. In Tajikistan, actually, the first laboratory confirmed cases of COVID-19 was reported end of April, and no state of emergency was declared to date, though there are some movement restrictions observed in different parts of the country, which I believe is a unique experience across the CIS, this region. And due to its reliance on external economy, the impact of pandemic has been felt in the country since early this year, even before this official reporting of the confirmed cases. The food prices spiked and the income from remittances was significantly reduced, if not lost. And the national currency was depreciated. Economic activity slowed down, reducing income generating opportunities and limiting population's access to credit. The food price spikes, coupled with the loss or reduced income, made nutritious food unaffordable to many people. According to the food and nutrient gap analysis that we implemented together with the government prior to COVID-19, nutritious diets cost 3 times more than energy-only diets, and up to 60% of households in different regions cannot afford nutritious diets. This is already pre-COVID. And facing the food insecurity shock and price hikes, vulnerable households further compromise the diversity and also the quality of food to rationalize the household expenditures. The social and economic impact of pandemic observed across the country, but the impact is felt differently among the population. And those households already vulnerable prior to the COVID-19 have become even more vulnerable, and specifically women have been disproportionately affected. And vulnerable households have been coping with the situation, employing severe and irreversible coping strategies like sale of productive assets, which undermine the household long-term resilience. In recent months, the overall situation appeared to be moderated. Food prices stabilized, remittances gradually recovering. The most recent macroeconomic analysis reveals that the overall impact on the economy was less than anticipated. But our major concern is the outlook of the upcoming winter, which is a lean season, especially among those who have been felt hardest hit by the crisis. And recognizing the importance of disaggregated data and the information, actually, FAO, FAO, and WFP, we initiated a joint crop and food security assessment mission. And the preliminary findings shed some light on the situation, informing alarming situations, especially among the vulnerable population, like women-headed households and smallholder farmers. The COVID-19 revealed vulnerability challenges across the food systems. It also posed opportunities to build sustainable food systems. And I'd like to close my intervention citing one practical example for building back better towards resilient and sustainable food systems. School feeding program, currently supported WFP, along with the other sister UN agencies and development partners, is gradually being handed over to the government with the national school feeding program being designed and implemented. And schools serve as the platform for multi-sectoral interventions. School meals provide important safety net, and especially among the children from poor and vulnerable households, offering one nutritious meal a day. And through the social behavioral change communication activities, the program promotes nutritious diets among the children and also personal hygiene. In view of COVID-19, this is also ever more important. It can promote the consumption of locally produced food, which is expected to boost agricultural production. And school meals play an important role by connecting different elements of food systems, such as child nutrition, nutrition education, agriculture, that are essential to promote sustainable resilient food systems for a healthy diet for children. Thank you. I will stop here. Thank you for the listening. Over to you.
Thank you, Mariko. Thank you very much. That was a very, very interesting presentation from the point of view of what's happening in Tajikistan. And if I may summarize, I think these are the key takeaways that, that I noticed. One is the tremendous dependence of Tajikistan on other countries. You know, I wasn't aware that half of all the food eaten in Tajikistan is imported, and there's also extreme dependence on remittances, both of which, of course, were affected by COVID-19. So once again, we note the importance of keeping trade slowing. Then the other key takeaway was how important inequality is in explaining disparities in access to food. And the third interesting point that you made was that, in fact, in the end, the impact of COVID-19 appears to have been fairly moderate, not as bad as was initially feared. Of course, it's still actually fairly early in the epidemic, so let's see how that goes. But so far, okay, it's not as bad as we had feared. And then there's the importance of building back better, particularly through school feeding programs, which have so many different aspects through which they can impact food security. So thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. And I'd like to move to Mr. Sergei Zoria, lead agriculture economist, Europe and Central Asia region, the World Bank. He is currently based in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, coordinating the agricultural portfolio in Central Asia. But I knew Sergei earlier when he used to work in the East Asia region of the World Bank. So over to you, Sergei, for your views, reflections, thoughts.
Thank you, Sumita. I would like to talk about important precondition for creating sustainable food system mentioned by Jamie, which is the public investments in agriculture and in the broader agri-food system. I work for the World Bank, covering the countries of Central Asia, where I observe a large underinvestment in public programs that are critical for successful development of sustainable food systems. I want to emphasize the importance of underinvestment in the right programs rather than the overall underinvestment in agriculture. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, for example, allocate relatively large budgets for agriculture. In 2017, Kazakhstan spent 0.9% of GDP on agriculture, and in 2018, Uzbekistan spent 1.3% of GDP on agriculture. For comparison, many OECD countries, which is the club of the rich countries, yes, with the smaller sector, with the smaller sort of importance of agriculture in the economy and in the labor market, but on average, these countries spend from 0.3 to 0.5% of GDP. So what Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan spends, as example, is quite substantial amounts. But what are the right programs that I emphasized about? And these programs include the agricultural research and development, advisory services, extension services, a program which link the small farmers to the modern value chains, such as productive partnerships, rural infrastructure, market information system, all those programs which have the nature of the public goods, the programs which are called general support services, which are not provided by the market, but they're extremely important to achieve sustainable, which is the climate smart and nutrition sensitive development of the food systems. The recent report of the World Bank produced in 2020 called Harvesting Prosperity, Technology and Productivity Growth in Agriculture showed a very strong correlation globally between investments in these core public goods and the growth in total agricultural productivity. Our recent report confirmed many findings of the analytical work done by FAO and many other international organizations and the researchers around the world, that the sustainable productivity growth is impossible without the investment in the right programs. One example of the right programs from that I mentioned above is the agricultural research and development. The middle income countries with the successful agriculture spends around 1% of the agricultural GDP on these programs. Kazakhstan spent half of that, and Uzbekistan spent only 0.04%. So while the overall budget envelope is quite good, but the importance of the allocate to the right programs and the implement this program good is extremely important to achieve the sustainable outcomes. But we see the increase in recognition by the governments in Central Asia, the need to redirect and refocus agricultural public expenditures. Shifts are already happening. And I hope that the COVID will not slow down those shifts, but actually accelerate those shifts in the right direction. This is also reflected in new generation of the World Bank investment projects, which are demand-driven. So they reflect the government priorities. In Kazakhstan, for example, the World Bank just approved in July 2020, a couple of months ago, the large sustainable livestock sector development program, the design of which is focused on value chain competitiveness, small farm inclusion, and environmental sustainability. And associated with these objective changes in the public expenditures in public service delivery. In Uzbekistan, we started implementation of the large agriculture modernization project, and when I mean large, it's $500 million project, which supports revitalization and strengthening of the public services neglected and underinvested for many years, plus agro-logistical infrastructure, digitalization of public institution and public services, and smallholder inclusion in horticulture value chains. To conclude, I believe that what we observe in the region, not only in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, two countries mentioned here, but also in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where we are also actively involved and engaged with the government and the farmers and other stakeholders, that value chain approach, competitiveness, digitalization, green growth, inclusion, and environmental fiscal sustainability all become core design features of new programs and projects for the World Bank in Central Asia, which will underpin sustainability of food systems and which will underpin building back better. These are important ingredients of transformation mentioned by Jimmy, which the World Bank will be glad to continue to work on and support our stakeholders. Back to you, Sumita.
Thank you very much, Sergey, for highlighting the importance not only of investment, but the right kind of investment in agriculture. I should point out, and I'm sure that you must have noticed this when you used to work in Asia, that the countries of Central Asia are not unique in spending money on the wrong thing. I mean, my own country, India, this is a major imbalance because government expenditure on agriculture goes on things like fertilizer subsidies, water subsidies, and so forth, which do nothing basically for providing public goods. So thank you very much for drawing attention to this. There's no doubt that underinvestment is a problem, but we must emphasize again and again that it has to be the right kind of investment which focuses on providing public goods that the market does not otherwise provide. So thank you for that very important perspective. And now I will turn to Mr. Alisher Shukurov, who is the advisor to the Minister of Agriculture of Uzbekistan on economics, innovative development, and investments. Alisher is a good friend who used to work for FAO until 1 month ago. So I'm very pleased to have him on the panel. He has over 20 years of professional experience working in private and government institutions, mainly covering such topics as sustainable forest and land management, biodiversity conservation, and protected area management. So over to you, Alisher.
Good morning, good afternoon, and also good evening. Sumita, thanks so much for introduction, and thank you also for the colleagues, ESCAP, and all partners organizing this excellent event, which is very timely and very important to share our knowledge and experience in this very difficult period which happened and linked with COVID. And we understood in this period how it is important to focus the food security and the agriculture development in the countries. So taking this opportunity, I would like to share with you some of our thoughts. And as working in the Ministry of Agriculture, this is very important to highlight to some important areas which we learned in this difficult period, in this linking with also COVID. And also I would like to thank Jamie for your presentation about the sustainable food systems. And to ensure the sustainable food systems, I believe that it's critically important the correct policies and the correct institutional measures to ensure the sustainability of our activities. With this respect, I would like to share with you that our experience related with the policy development and implementation, as we know that we don't know what happens tomorrow. So we should be prepared, as happened with COVID as well. So it means that we need strong and sustainable food systems. And listening to the presentation of Jamie, so I tried to find out how our Uzbekistan National Agriculture Strategy is relevant and how it covers to ensure the sustainable food systems in the country. And speaking some elements, first of all, about the economic development. The new agriculture development strategy of Uzbekistan, it is the result of the recent reforms in the country. So, of course, Uzbekistan last years, we observed more stable reforms, and of course, sector needed some critical improvement, as my colleague Sergey previously mentioned, particularly in the public sector, in the research sector. So the recent reforms in the country also did impact to the agriculture sector. So, and the last year, in 2019, Uzbekistan improved the first long-term agriculture development strategy. And this is very much linked with the SDGs. And it is with the long-term vision, as well as the short-term and the mid-term perspectives. So, linking with the sustainable food systems. So the first element, as I started to mention, about economic development. So the new agriculture development strategy of Uzbekistan promotes the market principles to apply in the sector, and to start reforming the sector with the business-oriented and the economic principles. My colleagues from Central Asia knows, and also some of our colleagues knows, that we had a long-term policy, and of course we had also some critics to the in the cotton and wheat sector, which was the fully managed by the government side. So currently, in response to the implementation of the agriculture development strategy, we are reforming the cotton and wheat sector more to the market-oriented approach. So this is the economic side. So in terms of the social side, so the new agriculture development strategy significantly focuses to the rural development and also ensuring the food security of the population, particularly focusing to the smallholders. So we know the smallholders is the critically important part of our community, and also in the production cycle. So they produce significant amount of agriculture production, and it is important to the food security of the families as well as also in the country. Particularly in the livestock sector, more than 80% production comes from the smallholders. So it's part of the response or implementation of our strategy. We are already providing significant resources to the smallholders, and the programs we're implementing jointly with our partners. Recently, we started the program with the World Bank and EU to support the small-scale farm investment program in the country. So these are some examples which we can demonstrate. Another important area is to support the women and the youth. So this is the critical part of our agricultural development strategy, and also linking with the nutrition, which is important to support the most vulnerable groups of the country. So, as mentioned in the presentation by Jamie, so environmental dimension is the critical important. So agriculture development strategy also covers the environmental sustainability while we are producing the production, but we should not forget about the environmental challenges. So agriculture development strategy focuses for the prevention of the land degradation, climate change, and also biodiversity conservation, particularly agrobiodiversity, which is the rich Central Asia, including Uzbekistan, with the agrobiodiversity crops. So, and here we can say that the save and grow concept is very much relevant in this area. So these are the main elements of our agriculture development strategy. But the last and not the least, I would like to mention that we have now important area in the strategy to focus for the research and extension system, extension services. So we are now initiating the new program, which calls Agriculture Knowledge and Innovation System, which is known as AKIS. This is the great initiative which brings all knowledge, all innovations, and all experiences, best practices together, and disseminates this knowledge among the stakeholders and all partners in this process. So it means that the new policy of agricultural development of Uzbekistan is really creating new environment to bring all stakeholders together, and also evidence-based, and as well as multi-stakeholder approach, and as well as a more cross-sectoral approach is brought in this agriculture development strategy. And we need to ensure the sustainable food systems in place. We need a correct policy. We need in place, as mentioned, the system thinking, and we need in place the coherent approach. So I believe that this is the one good example from Uzbekistan to demonstrate that good agriculture policy is a good condition to ensure the sustainable food systems in place in the sector. So these are the main highlights what I wanted to share with you. Thank you, Sumita.
Well, thank you very much, Alisher, for giving us this country perspective. And I think you've made some very, very important points that follow from, and that also react actually to Jamie's presentation. The key importance of resilience, and the fact that if you want to build resilience, then you need this kind of, then you need a cross-sectoral, coherent, systems-based approach, and that is precisely what the National Agricultural Strategy of Uzbekistan, the very first that the country has had, and which you developed last year. So I think this comes through, and I think it is critical for other countries in the region to think about this and try to develop their own comprehensive national agricultural development strategies. So thank you very much. This, I think, is a key point. Okay, so let me now, I see that our sixth panelist has managed to join us, Ms. Manzoora Sultanova. I will call upon her after Ms. Adiba Ahmedjanova. May I ask her to please give us her views, reflections next. Ms. Akhmedjanova is the founder of the Association of Agrarian Women working in the agrarian spheres. For many years, she's been focusing on science, research, and teaching at her alma mater, but also managed to successfully combine these efforts with public work. For 2 years, she was chairing a council of farmers and smallholders in one of the key agrarian areas of the country. And she has also worked as deputy governor of the Tashkent region responsible for women's issues. So I think this will be an extremely interesting perspective. So may I request you, Adima, please make your, to give us your views. Thank you.
Спасибо, господин Сумитра. Добрый день, уважаемые дамы.
I thank you, Sumitra, distinguished ladies and gents. On behalf of the Agrarian Association, I would like to welcome you at this forum, and I want to thank for this opportunity to speak. As it is known, the food security issue is one of the key where women play a very important part. In agricultural sector, our country, more than 3.5 million people are employed, and 1.5 million are women. More than 43% employed in agricultural sectors are women. Women successfully managing farms. In our republic, we have more than 81,000 farms. Out of them, more than 70% headed by women. In the Republic, we have big amounts, more than 680,000 hectares of land for household farming, where women play most important role as well. In the agrarian sector, our association was established long ago, and we since then have 3 regional branches in Karakalpaki, in Andizhansky and Fergana areas. Our association of women agrarian in Uzbekistan is the only non-governmental, non-commercial organization in the area of agriculture, which provides one of the most important SDG, in fact, gender equality in society. Social partnership between state and non-state structures, we already concluded 12 MOUs with key ministries, which further enhanced our capabilities. I also would like to underscore that based on our initiative in 2019, for the first time in Republic with the assistance of the government, we commemorated International Day of Agricultural Women, where more than 62,000 participated and 19,000 of them were promoted. I also should say that this event and other are helped. The association helped along with FAO regional country office, and using this opportunity, I would like to thank FAO for such support. Since pandemic in Uzbekistan, number of governmental decrees were adopted aimed at supporting entrepreneurs in rural areas, specifically for providing stability in agricultural production. We had some problems in logistics associated with lack of knowledge in IT, and digitalization impacted in dynamics of food production. Pandemics revealed weaknesses which are required solution in terms of building up logistic centers and clusters, hubs for distributions of agricultural foodstuffs. These issues most relevant for women because women are heading farms and agricultural association, and hence less access to modern digital technologies and awareness in general. So, halting tourism globally and in our republic, and agricultural tourism in particular, as well as a number of international and republican fairs, negatively impacted on attracting investments and trade facilitation, as well as providing needed investments to finance and knowledge. In order to activate the role of women, it is very important in terms of further launching and implementation territorial provincial programs based on cooperation between producers, distributors, and processors based on the principle one farm, one product. This approach would be a basis for beefing up agricultural production, strengthening cooperation with the making use of logistics hubs. Distribution free of charge of various manuals and guidelines on IT would have also positive impact on agricultural production, specifically those farms headed by women. Association is also very active in comprehensive support for women. We had a number of workshops on veterinary science, animal husbandry, and others. Nevertheless, the conduction of such workshop on behalf of international organizations and experts, of course, it would be further support for our women entrepreneurs in the sphere of farming. At the end of my presentation, I would like to admit that in order to accomplish successfully SDGs, which we're discussing now, as well as promoting women in agriculture, we need to be more focused in our endeavors in terms of improving professional level of women and matching it up with the demands of our current situation, which would further contribute to sustainable development of agriculture. I thank you.
Yes, thank you, Adiba, because I think you reinforced an extremely important point, which is the importance of women in agricultural development and in ensuring food security. And what I found interesting was that you also reinforced the point made by Sergei about investments, because it's clear that women farmers need support. And so this is where we need support from the government for knowledge development and also for investments in public goods. For example, you mentioned logistics hubs. And so this I think is an extremely important point. So we must, I think we'll come back to this, the tremendous importance of women for agricultural development and food security, and also the need for special support to them from the governments of the region. So thank you very much for pointing this out and for stressing its importance. Thank you. I will now request Ms. Manzoora Sultanova to give us her views, and she is the director of the NGO Albat in Tajikistan, and she has 24 years of experience in the field of civil society, having acquired skills in working with local communities and government agencies. So I'm very glad that she can join us because she can give us the views of civil society, which are, and I think civil society is an extremely important stakeholder in this multi-stakeholder partnership that we were referring to earlier. Please, Ms. Manzoura Sultanova.
Спасибо.
Thank you, moderator. First of all, I would like to thank for this opportunity to speak in front of such a big audience in this multi-stakeholder forum. And I also would like to speak up on behalf of women from Tajikistan and the pandemic situation. Food security and food sustainable system includes a number of processes. First, production, secondly, processing, thirdly is consumption of foodstuffs. And based on this approach, I would like to say that agricultural women are providing transmission of this system, and they are at the very beginning, at the very start of agricultural production. And of course, the quality of the original agricultural products are very important for further distribution and processing and distribution. COVID is a big shock per se for these three important components of the food system in the Republic of Tajikistan. As of now, in agricultural areas, considering what had been said before, migration processes are important, and we don't have too much men left in agricultural area, and the heavy burden of pandemic is now up to our women, and women have three or fourfold burden because they have to work in the fields, take care of their children and families, and take care of all household chores.
В некоторых семьях подрывается здоровье, и они...
And this burden is even deteriorated by the fact that quite often their health condition is deteriorated and they cannot get support. And so actually young people, rural young people are at the same, in the same condition right now, because so they are not covered by the education system now, they just have to find their livelihood. But if we are talking about rural women, of course, a lot of issues here, and I would like to emphasize or highlight only several of them, and put forward several proposals how to improve the situation in the rural area. For example, today, take into consideration the negative effect of the pandemic. I think we have to develop partnership and social dialogue in the rural communities to identify the needs in each region and how these needs can be met. Of course, it is needed to develop partnership with the governmental and administration entities, public administration entities. I think we have to look for social support for agricultural production. And the most topical for today, I think that in the rural area, in order to improve income of rural women, we have to promote an idea of organic production. They do not have resources to buy expensive fertilizers, but just to be involved in organic production, which can generate high income for rural households. And to ensure value added, we have to just hold a very broad coverage awareness and educational campaigns. I think this will help changing situation in the rural area for the better. So in this regard, I have two proposals. First, to just enhance FAO partnership with farmers. First, just to promote an idea of organic landing or organic agriculture in small farmers, which would have a positive effect on the agricultural produce quality and will have a positive effect on prices. And we will be able to promote standardization and certification of this agricultural produce, and in which will result in exporting of this produce, or which will generate additional income for the households. And second, to find possibilities to provide financial support to farmers, to female farmers, and of course, legislative framework and lobbying of certification process for organic produce in the country, in Uzbekistan. So to provide support to women, it will bring very good results, because our experience shows that we invite certification agencies from abroad. This is rather expensive process, and so they can hardly cover the production cost of agricultural produce. But I think if such certification is carried out by local agencies, it will improve the income of the agricultural households. And second, which was mentioned by the FAO representative about the situation, so that we depend on produce. We suggest that Tajikistan can join VSP Plus program, European program, which would allow to sell the products produced at zero tariff for Tajik export. And if European countries move forward this application, approximately 6,600 of goods and products produced in Tajikistan will be able to enjoy some privileged prices and privileged conditions at sales and distribution. Another painful issue for Tajikistan is, as you know, Tajikistan has very high birth rate, or particularly in rural areas, and take into consideration of COVID-19 food or nutrition restrictions, then I think that rural women reproduce human capital in the Republic of Tajikistan with certain negative effect, which can have a negative effect on the future generation of population, because this has a negative effect on the health condition of the children who are going to be born in these families. Of course, a lot of other painful issues, but in spite of the fact that we experience, that the rural areas experience, particularly in COVID-19 pandemics, so there is a very good and quite literate civil society, which works jointly and cooperates with almost all governmental entities, and it can provide very good support and find ways out. You know, any country can find itself in such conditions, in climatic conditions, which has a negative effect on rural areas in our country. As far as environmental issues are concerned, so the situation is a little bit better because we have clean water, clean air, clean water resources, clean energy, but as far as climate change conditions are concerned, so we still have concerns in the rural areas associated with mud floods and other natural disasters, mud flows. So thank you very much. That's all from my part.
Thank you very much, Manzura. Thank you so much, because it is important that once again you highlighted the tremendous contribution of women to agriculture and to food security in the region. And the fact that, particularly in Tajikistan, the exodus of men out of agriculture and in many cases out of the country to work elsewhere and send remittances home, this had already placed heavy burdens on women, particularly in rural areas. And of course, these problems have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. There's not only agricultural work, but also childcare and household chores, and also the problem of getting health support in rural areas. And now, of course, you've got the problem of education, particularly for rural youth. So yes, these are important points. I would also like to draw everyone's attention to a point about the importance of organic agriculture for women and how it can contribute to their economic betterment. I think this is also something that we need to keep in mind. So thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation, and I'm glad that that you could join us after all. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Спасибо.
Thank you.
Okay. We will now move on to the third part of this forum, in which we'd like to have a discussion among the panel members. I also see that the audience have been sending in questions, and I would like to put them to the panel, but let's have a brief panel discussion before we go further. Good God, it's 12:26. Okay, so we haven't really got much time left. I think about 30 minutes. May I, one thing that does, I think, concern a lot of people, and I think it would be helpful if we could ask the following question: how does the adoption of a food system approach accelerate progress towards the 2030 agenda, particularly SDG 2? Because Jamie, in his presentation, pointed out that, for example, it's very important to have policy coherence, that different ministries must learn to work together, and so forth. And well, I hate to say this, but I've been hearing this for more than 25 years. I mean, going back to the early 1990s, we've been hearing about the importance of policy coherence and, getting different government departments and ministries to work together, but somehow we are still saying this. So what I want to sort of get a handle on is this question of why. I mean, what is it that prevents ministries and so forth from working together? Because if a food system approach is critical, then we need to understand why and what is the minimum level of coherence that we need in order to implement the food system approach. Because if otherwise, we risk making the best the enemy of the good. So I'll leave it at this. So let's ask ourselves this question: how does the adoption of a food system approach accelerate progress towards the 2030 agenda? Who would like to go first? perhaps who would like to speak first? Maybe Jamie would like to go first? Jamie? Ah, there he is.
The microphone. Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent point that you make. It is certainly true that over the past years there has been this plea for greater policy coherence, which in many cases we're simply not seeing. There are examples now emerging in some countries. I take Norway as a great example of this, who have recently released a food system strategy which was developed by 7 different ministries and which is also being used to inform their overseas development assistance. But these examples are pretty rare. And within the sub-region, it may be that there are some initial developments. But I think we're still at a starting point as to how we actually do that. One of the difficulties, obviously, is that different ministries have different mandates, and the prioritization of those mandates can be difficult in an inter-ministerial context. We see some examples of this in fact, with the COVID recovery from COVID, where a return to sort of economic development, the improvements of livelihoods through reducing levels of unemployment has become a key priority. And some of the interventions that we're seeing to promote a move back to food consumed out of the house, for example, as a way of stimulating jobs within the food outlet and food retail, are actually having a negative impact in terms of nutritional outcomes, because people tend to be moving more back to sort of less nutritious food and taking advantage of some of those policy stimulus. So I think this is an example of how there's still a lot of work to do. I think capacity building of different ministries in relation to how we might take a more systemic approach is critical, because we still, in many cases, don't have a real grasp of how it can be done. In a number of countries, we're looking at supporting improvements in governance of food systems by developing capacities in food system assessments, using improved data to look through some of the trade-offs. But I think I completely agree with you. It's an aspiration, but I think it's a very important aspiration and is a real stumbling block to moving forward with the transformation towards sustainable food systems, which deliver on a multiple number of outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you. As usual, we're running out of time, but I would like to follow up on this because this is it's a key question. And may I request Alisher for his views, and I would also like to ask Adiba, how do we integrate the gender dimension into this? Because that's a key part of it. And, if we leave women out, we're not going to achieve healthy nutrition. Okay, then, coherence, okay, fine, that's fine. But then how do we bring in women? How do we bring them into the picture? So may I start then with Alisher, so that, having a great deal of experience in the government, perhaps he can shed some light on this matter. Alisher?
Yes, Sumita, thank you for the question. As already our colleagues from Tajikistan and also my colleague from the Women's Association show, they gave some examples and some good points how the women is important in the sector, also in the food systems. So most importantly, I would say that from my experience, this is the, I think, lack of correct information, how the role of women is important in the food systems. or not enough information. And also, as we discussed about the statistics and also evidences, what is the contribution of the women in the sector and why it is important? Why it is important also in the nutrition side, because of the health of the women also important for the new generation, etc. So these are the main messages that from my side. This is the having the correct information and awareness why the women is important in the sector. This is how it can happen. So one of the example is that we did in Uzbekistan, we did a country gender assessment, and the country gender assessment we assessed amongst different stakeholders, government, non-government, private sector, as mostly also we tried to deliver the main messages to the government sector. So this was the one example that such studies can give good understanding and also can give some policy recommendations that we can integrate the gender dimensions and the gender issues in our policies and our strategies. So this is the first, I think, step. And the next step, we can really go to the field, that how really we can apply the recommendations in the field, taking into consideration of the roles of the gender in the sector and also in the farm level or in the other levels. So this is the main message from my side.
Yes, thank you very much, Alisher. Good points, both of them. There is also a question from the audience for Ms. Adiba and Ms. Manzoora. And the question is, given the key role that you both mentioned about the key role that you both mentioned women play in agricultural systems and rural communities, how has the pandemic affected gender disparity? Do you have a real life example to share about COVID-19 impact on gender disparity in the agriculture sector? I'm addressing this to both of you, Adiba and Manzoora, please. Who would like to go first?
Thank you. As far as specific negative impact examples of COVID, I cannot give you now, but the pandemic negatively impacted both women and men. But three important factors which I would like to outline as a role of women in food security, nutrient security, and proper diet. If women, more than 43%, are employed in agriculture, their professional level, their knowledge, if we would upgrade their proficiency and knowledge, then this 43%, which are women, would have a very positive impact on agriculture. In addition, food safety is important in terms of volumes and in terms of quality. And we have a very proper approach in terms of organic production share boosting. And in this regard, training women in organic farming is very important. Setting up international standards, introducing these international standards into our organic farming practices. And in addition to this, women, not only in agriculture, but also women who are in charge of proper nutrition for their families. That is why understanding the proper nutrition practices and diets, considering age requirements for their children, I think the role of women here is also tremendous. That is why our approach has to be comprehensive in terms of upgrading our women level, in terms of boosting production volumes, more efficient agricultural practices, rational irrigation, and other things, including organic, environmentally friendly production. And the next point, after such an approach, we also need to develop skills to introduce international packaging standards into our agricultural production and processing, because there are a lot of things in terms of agricultural losses when we deliver in agriculture from farms to the end consumers. Thank you. As far as your question is concerned, the impact of pandemic on gender inequality, I would say that pandemic is hit more badly women, first of all, because under pandemic circumstances, a big burden falls into medical practitioners, and we know that medical practitioners are mostly women. And just imagine that these women doctors and nurses, they actually work for the whole months outside their families because of the lockdown and strict conditions which they have to bear during the pandemic. So these are not only women in agriculture, but women in general who suffered a lot because of the pandemic, and women doctors and nurses are badly hit specifically. The pandemic is still ongoing, and that means that the negative impact is still there on women. And yes, pandemic significantly aggravated gender disparities in my country and in general, I believe, in the world. And very good that Adiba spoke about organic farming. And I believe that if this idea would be introduced entirely in our agricultural sector, this would have impact on the health status of our women, because while dealing with chemicals, pesticides in particular, they are jeopardizing their health. And when they will stick to organic farming without chemicals, then their health status will be definitely improved. The women in farming have the right for better health, and as we mentioned many times, women's health is a prerequisite of healthy generations. Thank you.
Interesting observation. Once again, we came back to the importance of organic agriculture. Now, while we're on the subject of COVID-19 and food systems, I would like to ask Mariko the following question. How have humanitarian organizations responded to prevent a food security crisis? And in connection with that, I think if you could give us in other words, how, for example, how has WFP responded? How other national humanitarian organizations? How has civil society responded? You would like to get some idea? Thank you, Mariko.
Thank you, Smita. That's it's a very good question actually. Humanitarian development nexus and how we manage to respond. To start with, Tajikistan never declared a state of emergency, and also there's no formal lockdown in the country. So in that sense, from the beginning, we have been, humanitarian development agencies, we've been facing challenges to mobilize resources and advocate the case of Tajikistan. Because whenever the crisis occur, the first thing at the donor countries, what they looked at is the COVID cases reported. As I said in my intervention, Tajikistan reported cases officially only end of April. But the impact was already being felt February and March because of the heavy reliance on the external economy. So there was quite a challenge for the international organizations, including the donor communities in Tajikistan, to advocate and make a case to mobilize resources. Nevertheless, many agencies, including WFP, we adjusted our ongoing program so as to cater to meet the immediate needs of the affected population. Just take an example, WFP, we have support to build the resilience of the communities in view of the climate change adaptation, but we utilize the same resources to intervene with the cash for food, cash for work type of activity, which is a relief activity, just to make sure that the most affected vulnerable population who lost the income, they have some work and also in exchange of cash. Cash is provided in exchange of their labor. So there are some activities implemented making use of the existing resources from the WFP side. Others, civil society, I have to say also the government intervention was quite timely and effective, especially on the release of the strategic reserve food stock. As mentioned in other countries' observations, I think in Kyrgyz example, equally in Tajikistan, there was a panic buying and the food disappeared from the market at one point of time. Not really because of the real issues of the availability, but it's more about the panic buying. But the government timely released the strategic reserve and also did the information campaign that food is available in country. So those are also interventions from the government side. And the civil society and the local entrepreneurs, they are also in some of the regions, they're quite active. For instance, making use of the digital tool, informing the population that where they can find, for instance, wheat flour, which shops things are available. When there's a shortage of food in the main market, or there's some restriction in the movement for the rural population to move to the major market. So I would say, different agencies and also the government and civil society entrepreneurs, we all did what we could at the onset of the crisis. Over to you, Sumite.
Thank you very much, Mariko. If the panelists don't mind, I'd like to stick with COVID-19 for a couple more minutes. I have a follow-up question here. How should we, following up to what Mariko said, which is, there's a short-term response and there's a medium-term to longer-term response. So my follow-up question basically addresses this, the issue of the medium to long-term response. How should we support farmers? And sorry, this question is addressed to Sergey. How should we support farmers to protect them from this kind of crisis and prevent another food crisis? And in fact, connected with this, there's a question from the audience about making sure that in our long-term response, we continue to pay due attention to environmental sustainability, because the question mentions that we're using more disposable plastic containers for food services. How can the eco trend be revived in the food and agriculture sector? And what measures can be introduced to build back better and cope with greenhouse gas emissions caused by agriculture and food production? So as you can see, this is really about the long term, right? Fine, yes, we support farmers, but then we have to support them in a particular way, through the right kinds of investments, as you pointed out, Sergey. So I would welcome your thoughts on this. Over to you.
Several panelists mentioned the instruments available to the government at the time of emergencies to respond. That's temporary injections of funds or credit to beneficiaries, tax exemptions, etc. Right? But these instruments need to be built, or the system needs to be put in place before the crisis struck. And the challenge in the regions have been that the region was not ready. There has been public stocks in all of the countries, but they were small, without operational management clearly ready for this large impact. Social safety nets exist. It's historically present in Central Asia from the Soviet times, but it has low coverage, leakages, and the challenge to using safety net this time was that in contrast to 2008-10 global food spike, the fiscal stress and the reduction of income because of the remittances drop has been significant. So government lost significant amount of income, so they couldn't easily beef up safety nets. So the point is on the how to help farmers to respond to future significant shocks is to have these instruments which COVID showed they would be important to use, like social safety net, public stocks, market information system, to be available to understand what's going on and disseminate information as much as possible, to have it in place, available, tested, and then used during those crises. And I feel my observation that in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, the issues related to public stock management and safety net are taken very seriously because they were severely hit by these instruments not being readily available to respond, and they understand that the crisis will end. This crisis with the climate change we have going to repeat in the future. Now, the example of the public program, which has the medium-term implication and the trade-off with the short-term needs, is the seed sector development in Tajikistan, for example. Tajikistan is vulnerable not only because it imports food. A colleague from WFP, Mariko, mentioned that more than 50% of the food consumed in the country imported. But the country imports also 70–80% of the seed requirement. And every time there is a crisis, there is a sort of pressure and needs to international organizations to distribute seeds. I think we've done it, and many of our organizations did it in 2010, 2011, after the global food price crisis, with the expectation that the government will now invest into the strengthening the seed system in the future to avoid this emergency distribution of seeds in the future, but it has not happened. I think not to repeat the same mistake, we have to focus, while we have to address the short-term issues, I think the capacity to address those short-term issues are significantly lower this time in the COVID crisis, because it's not only global food crisis, it's also economic crisis, health crisis at the same time. But not to lose the limited budget, which we increasingly have, limited fiscal resources, to start establishing a sustainable system, for example, for seeds, that the country build its own system and does not depend on, it's not only good for the productivity, for climate change, for many other things, but also to reduce vulnerability and such a high dependence. Importing seeds is healthy, but not to that extent as has been in Central Asia. 70–80% of horticultural seeds is imported. This is not the right approach, and this is not the this is the time to look into the needs, the public expenditures going forward, to invest into the seed system especially. Over.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, indeed. I think you've highlighted the key issue, particularly seeds. Yes, indeed. That's a sort of foundational issue. Yeah, so I think we need to bear this in mind as we go forward. Okay, so with that, I think I will move now to perhaps may I ask Kanath if he could give us his thoughts on the most significant food system challenges that affect nutrition, because now I'd like to talk a little bit about healthy diets and healthy nutritional patterns. So what are the most significant food system challenges that affect nutrition in the countries of North and Central Asia? And how have patterns of consumption, production, distribution, etc., changed in the last 20 years? So perhaps you could give us your views on that matter, Kanath. Over to you.
Yes. We need to say that it's very interesting how it's interrelated. Immediately after the decreasing the poverty in all Central Asian countries improved, people start to eat more. Unfortunately, people start to eat more very unhealthy products. Basically, it's fat, it's carbohydrates. People start to eat a lot of noodles, a lot of bread, and a lot of red meat, actually. And also increased consumption of processed food and sugar, or products which contains a lot of sugar, for example, it's like Coca-Cola, this kind of stuff, and it's very, very unhealthy, and it's immediately affect on increasing of diseases in the country. In Kyrgyzstan, we can notice that diabetes increasing. There are a lot of increased obesity, increased number of infarcts per 100,000 people, and all this stuff actually originates from the very unhealthy diet. And one of the very latest actually challenges which people face this year, millions of people were limited in their opportunity to leave their homes. And especially it was very unhealthy for the urban residents because they cannot leave their apartments, and but they still keep the same level of consumption of the same very unhealthy diet. I think this is a huge challenge which we current people have. Even we have a lot of chances to improve our nutrition, our diet still become very, very unhealthy. This is actually what I can say about this this problem. Thanks a lot, Sumitra, for this opportunity to be on the panel again.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. But can I just ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
What do you think are, this issue is there, okay? And it's, I would like to emphasize that this is not specific to North and Central Asia. For example, I was reading about Mexico and the tremendous increase in obesity that, they've observed in that country, caused basically by consumption of snacks and consumption of soft drinks, like Coca-Cola, okay, which are, so it's not something that's very specific to our countries in this region. It has to do with the fact that these are cheap sources of calories, and that's basically it. Ultimately, and they're deliberately designed to be addictive. The big corporations that make these products design them because the human body, because of evolution and natural selection and so forth, is programmed to respond to fat and sugar, particularly.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
this is my, I keep grappling with this question. We need to somehow incorporate the nutritional dimension into the system. How do we do that? It's difficult because we are swimming against the tide, so to speak. Um, yeah. What do you think about that? I mean, what are here?
Yes, one of the activities which Donut already doing in Kyrgyzstan, and not only in Kyrgyzstan, in Central Asia, it's trying to intervene in school education. School education, where people, young new, let's say, citizens, future citizens, have a chance to eat. Pardon, Senator, do you talking? Oh. Can I continue?
I beg your pardon.
Okay.
Sorry, I did not switch off my mic. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I think the answer on your question is education. We need to spend more time, more efforts on educate people, tell them how it's possible to overpass, how it's dangerous, how it's correlate with non-communicable diseases. And we need to bring a lot of statistics. We should prepare infographics on that matter. This is actually not one donor. There is, let's say, there are a lot of donors. World Food Program, World Health Organization, FAO, all responsible agencies. And it's actually, we are decreasing our poverty, we are decreasing our hunger across the world. But on the other hand, we are decreasing the quality of food and which people consume because of very unhealthy diet. And we should educate people. And one of the answers is work for the new generation, or operate in the schools, maybe check for a curriculum. Actually, we also doing one of the our exercise which we are doing. We are analyzing what kind of teaching materials people have, what they know about the healthy diet, what they know. Could we, let's say, is it possible to promote it through the national TV? Is it possible to promote it through the internet? Maybe it's already time to, let's say, to move more attention on that area, because as you know, you cannot force people, but you can motivate people, you can educate people, and I think it will have a very good effect on the results, which we may. We need to spend more attention on that, and maybe we can get better results over the next few years. I hope I answer on your question.
That's very good. In fact, it's good that we came up to this point because there is a question from the audience which I will throw open to any panel member who wishes to respond, and that is that given the sort of impact we have seen, the impact of COVID-19, how do you think this is going to shape the evolution of food and nutrition security over the next 10 years? I mean, has anything changed? Will we go back to business as usual? Do you think, because, one day it will be over, right? I hope that day will be soon, okay? One day it will be over. And then what? Do we go back to business as usual? Or do you think that the situation has changed permanently? So, since you are already speaking, Kanat, perhaps you want to give your views, but I would also like to hear from other members of the panel. Please.
I will be as short as possible. Yes, I think it's possible that we will forget again a lesson learned. That's why it's a very good time right now to start how it's possible to put it to a public policy, how it's possible to change educational program, how it's possible to transform lesson learned which we passed over the last several months to our healthcare system. So everything is possible if we bring more attention and try to fix it in a number of interventions. And I think this international donor society have an excellent opportunity to collect all the knowledge across the globe and maybe prepare some global program how could be learned and self-taught through this process. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Now, would any other member of the panel like to respond? Please. Mariko, please.
Yes, if I may. Sorry. I just also wanted to say a few words on the previous earlier discussion, which is more on the nutritious diet. And I mean, people going for unhealthy food. Actually, in Tajikistan, we did a study on this regarding the social behavior change communication, and also cost of the diet analysis. And in fact, more and more people opting for unhealthy diet, but it is not always the cheap option. There are different reasons why people are going for the unhealthy diet. For instance, mothers, just to calm down the children, they're giving this sugary food and also processed food, which is not cheap, but still, for them, for the mothers, it is more important to calm the children down so that they can focus on other work priority at the household level. We actually look at if the household are not spending money on the snacks for children, what saving they can make and what nutritious food they can actually purchase. And the findings was quite interesting and powerful in the sense that if they can compromise on the snacks, they can buy better food instead. So just to highlight that it is not always the cheap option. There are other reasons. Perhaps it's very much context specific and even household or family specific. And we should really understand why it is happening and addressing the causes of that. Just wanted to highlight on this nutritious diet. Then the COVID-19 related, I think it is really too early to say because we are still in the middle of it, and it is very difficult to say what's going to happen. We all talk about new normals, etc. But I think one of the things that perhaps discussed more and more in the country here in Tajikistan is that the importance of local production. Yes, it is not realistic for the country not to rely on imported food, but at the same time, lesson learned is really the supply chain. The system can be very fragile when the shock, something like this COVID-19 occur. And the local production, promoting the production and the consumption of the locally produced food, I think there's a very good momentum to promote this regard. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariko. That was very interesting. I just would like to clarify one thing. I'm an economist. When we say cheap, it's not only money, we're also thinking in terms of time. And one of the things about prepackaged snacks is that they do save time, because you don't need to cook whatever it is. So, but your point is very well taken. It's simply that we need to kind of broaden the dimension of cost to include the cost of time. That's all. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll turn now to Sergey.
Sumita, can I come back to your question about the impact of COVID on the future? Which is, I think the COVID will leave the lasting impact, and it may be for the better in the countries which make the right choice, but maybe for the worse. What I observe right now in Central Asia, complete sort of disbelief into the markets to help address issues during this crisis, both externally and internally. The export bans introduced by Kazakhstan were not helpful. And these are repeated export bans. So this is not the first time, right? I mean, that happened in 2010, and the people during the reform of the state order system for grains in Uzbekistan, when the people argued against liberalization, was the export restrictions of grain in 2010, 2011 from Kazakhstan, right? So people remember that. Now you have repeat, even as I say, in a situation when it's not only food crisis, but it's significant health and economic crisis. So as a result of that, so the countries, what I see in the next decade, the countries will try to produce more food themselves. Now, if they turn into the trade protection, they will lose. If they will spend more and better on the right agricultural programs, because there's still, the agricultural potential is huge in these countries and it's not realized. So I see nothing bad. If you can competitively produce this food and the competition depends on the investing in the government, of the right role of the government, then I think that will be an opportunity for many countries to catch up and look on the agriculture as a driver of growth, which has not been the case in the last decade. The government has sort of ignored agriculture as the driver of growth and look on the other parts of the economy. And the same is if the country take more control of agriculture or they facilitate and invest into the right programs, that will also determine the final outcomes. So what I say is that there is the impact, because I feel
sorry, Sergey, we can't hear you. You're frozen.
the agenda stronger make risk. Okay. Yeah, I'll conclude now.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we sort of lost you towards the end. I think there were some connection problems. So I think one key takeaway from what you just said is that yes, indeed there will be an impact, but whether the impact is positive or negative depends very much on what governments do. And in particular, they should focus on developing their country's agricultural sectors, but they shouldn't be thinking in terms of trade restrictions. I think this is a key point. And it also, I think, ties in with what Manzoora and Adiba said about organic agriculture and its importance for women. And of course, the challenges there are immense in developing organic agriculture, but it could be something that we can consider. Silke, you would like to intervene? Hello? Hello? I can't hear anyone. Okay. Okay, well, if no one else has a question or an intervention to make, I would like to request the audience, if they have any further questions for us, for the panelists, for the keynote speaker, and so forth. Anyone from the audience? Because so far we have only got 3 questions. I personally found this discussion absolutely fascinating, and I'm hoping that that everyone did, that members of our audience found it equally interesting. So if you've got any questions or comments, now's the time. Okay. Nothing so far. All right, then I think since we've run over our allotted time, I'll close by trying to summarize this very rich and personally very fascinating discussion. So one of the key questions here is how to build a good food system. As Jamie pointed out, this is still a bit of an aspiration because we need somehow to achieve the kind of coherence we need, without which we can't have a good food system that delivers healthy nutritional patterns, that delivers healthy diets. It is clear that in North and Central Asia, the existing food system is not actually delivering healthy diets. I mean, that I don't think anybody disputes that. The other issue with the existing food systems in this region is that they allow very significant disparities to exist, particularly with respect to gender, but also location, but primarily gender. And so the question now is, okay, we've had this crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, which has concentrated minds throughout the region. I think governments, academia, civil society, citizens, I think everybody recognizes now the importance of the food system, because it's not until food value chains begin to break down that you begin to really appreciate the importance of the food system. It really brings it home. So now everybody understands the need for resilience, for a resilient food system that delivers healthy nutrition. But as Sergei pointed out at the end, yes, indeed, it's very much in the hands of the region's governments, but also, I mean, we mustn't forget, I mean, the government is not the only stakeholder. We all have to pitch in here. It's very much in our own hands. I mean, do we manage to get a good food system out of this? Can we change food systems in the right way so that they deliver good nutrition? That remains to be seen. And in that context, I think we need to think about how exactly we should move. And I think Alisher's presentation really highlighted the key importance of having a strategy, because without that, any kind of coherence will be difficult to achieve. And I would also like to highlight the importance of investments, the right kind of investments, and the importance of avoiding trade restrictions. So these are some of the themes that come out of it. We have an opportunity. I think people are thinking about food systems in a way that they haven't, in a way that they haven't really thought about them in the last 30, 40 years. There is a tremendous opportunity. Let us see if we can seize it. And on that note, I'll stop by thanking ESCAP for organizing this. We in FAO have had a long and productive association with ESCAP. I myself used to work very closely with them when I was posted in Bangkok. But I'm very happy to see that our strong collaboration is continuing. So thank you very much. I would also like to thank the keynote speaker and the panelists for taking part and really, giving their best to this session. And may I also take this occasion to thank my colleagues, Maria Del Mar Colo and Kego Obara, for working tirelessly in the last, particularly the last 2 or 3 weeks, to make this session happen. So thank you all. Thank you very much. And with that, we'll close the session. Over to you, Natalia.
Indeed, thank you so very much, everybody. This was a very, very interesting and engaging session. I myself have learned a lot of new facts, and it was great to just hear it from all the different perspectives. So I just want to make a little housekeeping announcement. In the YouTube channel, we will now post the link to the evaluation questionnaire. Please take the time to fill it out. It will help us to improve our meetings. And then otherwise, I would like to invite everybody to join tomorrow, 10 a.m. Almaty time. We will have a session on inclusive, resilient, and sustainable economies. And then in the afternoon at 2 p.m. Almaty time, we will have a session on connectivity and partnerships. And we very much would like to invite everybody to join. Once again, Sumitar, colleagues, panelists, very well done. Thank you. Goodbye.